Hey, yo, what's good, everyone? Twisted here with the Open Sorcery, and today, as is usual, I am joined by my lovely co-host Devi. And as a follow-up to a conversation that we had a bit ago with our friend Light, we had gone ahead and discussed aspects of masculinity and femininity, the divine masculine, the divine feminine. So, pretty much in having that conversation, you know, we touched on each of them as their own separate sort of thing, but it makes logical sense, especially this, I believe, being the 69th, you could say, official scheduled episode of the series of Wednesday drops that we do. That this is number 69. So us going ahead and talking about mystical union, the coming together of the masculine and the feminine, the merging of these two energies, and all of that sort of thing, and what that all pertains to. So immediately after having that talk with these two, and going ahead and that discussion right there, I was like, you know what, we definitely should touch on it, and I went ahead and put down tons of bullet points and had a bit of a stream of consciousness. And so the first thing that went ahead and actually, went ahead and, like, I guess happened right after that was I went ahead and was on YouTube listening to some music, checking some stuff out, in the downtime afterwards, and the song Holy Grail by Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake came on. And for me, I remember when that album dropped, Magna Carta Holy Grail, back in 2013 or so. And, like having a semblance of the understanding of the symbolism of what was being spoken on that time. Since then, there's a little bit more insight that I've gotten. But the reason why that kind of stuck out to me is I don't particularly recall if in that conversation we made mention, there's a good chance of it, but in terms of the Holy Grail, right, and having spoken about the masculine, the feminine, and the symbolic, associations with it, right, that there is, the aspect of the Holy Grail, right, or, in the movie The Da Vinci Code, particularly, right, or you could say the cup, the chalice, and that being symbolic of the feminine in of itself, right? And, seeing the Da Vinci Code when I was younger, that went ahead and laid down foundation for a lot of my understanding and so on and so forth. And of course, like it was mentioned in that film as well, the counterpart to the feminine being the masculine, being the sword, the blade, and all that sort of thing. And when I think about the album Magna Carta Holy Grail, right? I think of, the Magna Carta, the signing of that document, the order, the orderly, putting things into order, and all that sort of thing. That being, more so the masculine, and the Holy Grail, of course, once again, feminine, and all that sort of thing. So, also another thing, since we're talking about like things having to do with, medieval England, what have you, and also mentioning the sword, there's also the tale of the sword and the stone from Arthurian lore, which, you could say is talking about like, coming into more so of a heavenly sense, and that being more so of a, I guess, the masculine side of the mythos. This is just me, spitballing at this moment. But, how about you, Debbie? What do you think about, you know, those sorts of Arthurian tales and how they relate to the masculine and the feminine, or just anything I've said thus far?
I mean, you've said a lot. So you kind of went on a bit of a rampage on it, but no, in
Yes.
terms of the joining and the masculine and feminine, the thing that immediately comes to mind with me is the yin and yang. That is
Yes.
that is immediately the thought that I have, and the symbolism within that. Yes, the cup being the symbol of the feminine and the sword being the symbol of the masculine, but also, if we take it just a step further, we also have in the tarot, we've got the cups, we've got the swords, but we've also got the wands and the pentacles. So, I mean, there's lots of masculine and feminine in everything. Um, and it's in symbolism everywhere, just like we see in like more astrological or kind of deity worship. The moon is seen as feminine, whereas the sun is seen as masculine, but they're both luminaries. Even though, yes,
Yes.
the moon does require the sun's glow, the moon controls a lot. So it's not one just being completely dependent on the other. And we need both. So, sorry, my brain is like haywire at present.
Oh, you're good. Well, for transparency's sake, in terms of us recording this is pretty late on at night, and all of that for both of us. So, yeah, understandable. And I guess we should go ahead and take a little more time to touch upon, just the masculine and the feminine a little bit more so before going ahead and delving continually into the mystical union in of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for the masculine, right? I'll go ahead and take that, and then you feminine, of course. Just generally, right? Kind of like a little recap. The masculine itself, that is, the orderly, right? That is the pushing, right? I'm kind of thinking of the visual of like using the hands and like, the nature of it, when you look at pictures of say Jesus or, other sorts of figures, with the right hand up, that's going ahead and with a couple fingers pointing out the middle and the pointer, that being the sword mudra and all of that sort of thing, right? That is what is separates. That is what goes ahead and can be utilized for, say, LBRP, in the Western magical school of things or what have you. Just like, that going ahead and helping to, separate, the orderly from the chaotic, and creating that sort of boundary. Um, and how about, for the feminine, right? In contrast to that.
Feminine is holding. Feminine is also flow and multiplication. So anything that you give a woman, she's going to multiply and give back. That is just the way of the world. That is how the feminine operates, because things have to grow, right? Whereas, you've said the masculine is structure and it separates. Feminine brings it together to multiply it. So it's harvest in a field. Yeah, it's great. You get the grains and everything that you need, or the plants and whatnot, but the plant itself is done and it has to die away. But then you take the seed, come back, and it grows again. Um, so,
From the agricultural standpoint, there's, men usually are the hunters and women are usually the gatherers.
mhm,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. For another time.
See,
Third time's charm.
yes.
But yeah, so, truth be told, people know, men, women, this is part of our existence. And we already went ahead and had a conversation about both of them singularly. So I think that's good enough for a summary, right?
Mhm.
So moving on forward, so the actual mystical union, the actual unification, the marriage of masculine and feminine, whether you want to talk about actual people or you want to talk about energies and all that sort of thing, right? So, what is that usually more so when we come to just regular verbiage and the lexicon? We're talking about marriage, right? We're talking about the coming together of two individuals, usually in like the sacrament, the Abrahamic sort, or in any other sort of belief system, or even not associated with any sort of spirituality or belief system, right? But the act of marriage, right? And generally speaking, marriage is a contract, whether it be legal, whether it be spiritually, physically, in a sense. And, like, so obviously legal, that's usually what people think of when they think of the term marriage, and not really needing to go into that all too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
But spiritually, you know, um, with that right there, uh, there's actually, a particular segment of a live stream that I had seen from last time that we went ahead and had the conversation on masculine and feminine, however many months ago to now, with a one of the YouTubers that we both happen to listen to quite a bit, Brother Yosef. And in that, I will go ahead and link the particular live stream that was. And in that, he goes ahead and talks about the aspect of marriage spiritually. And paraphrasing his particular words, right? You know, having sex, and even including one night stands, is a contract between souls, between a male and a female. And, generally speaking, like that sort of contract, uh, by his estimation and wording, lasts for 7 years. Or I believe in another video where I've gone ahead and heard him talk about it. When you're going ahead and like, you go ahead and you do, you bang, you fuck, you do whatever, right? It can last between 6 months up to 7 years, and there being that variance and such. Um, that sort of thing. So, in terms of that aspect of it, what are your thoughts in terms of the mystical union and the connection, the masculine and the feminine coming together?
If we're talking about more of the sexual aspect, yes, that is. I don't see the sexual aspect as necessarily fully a contract agreement, sure, but it is a meshing of energies. Think of it as a woman is literally letting you inside of her, right? Even if
Yes.
it's not necessarily an actual feminine partner, but one partner is acting more in the feminine role, you are literally inside of your partner. Um, and so gaining entry, it's almost like giving somebody a house key and trusting them with everything that you own. So, very much it is that connection and that exposure. Um, and it creates some intense ties, and they are exceedingly hard to get rid of. Now, in terms of the marriage contract in itself, and if we're thinking more of the legal one, so as I've already stated, I just went through a divorce, right? So
Yes.
with that, I could feel that there was not just one party in the marriage. And this is my own experience with it, because you can literally feel, or I could at least, that the marriage is not just between you and the person that you're with. It also has the state or country or wherever it is sanctioned tied in with it, which sapped every ounce of energy from me. And that was honestly the part where I was just like, I recognize this now. I need to run. Um, but that contract, that one I would say is an absolute contract, and it is meant to build a corporation. Marriages were never really something for love. If we're looking back historically, that's not what it was for. It was for empires to be born, for families to be brought together. It didn't necessarily mean that the two people that were involved in it had really anything to do with one another. It was a merging of finances and homes and things, material goods. And yes, it does hit on a spiritual level because everything does. And it's really hard to get rid of. And it takes so much to be able to do so. And quite frankly, that attachment fights back the moment that you try to rid yourself of it.
Oh
So,
yes.
yes.
And in your case, there being a thought form, an egregore, or you could say a god form, or whatever the case may be for your particular state,
Yes.
going ahead and interceding and like trying to be like, no, you two are tied together. It's in our records, and you are a part of the establishment, and trying very difficult, like making it difficult, so you two don't go through that, and you just stick with the norm.
Yeah. And be prepared. Be prepared for a fight cuz spiritually it's exhausting. But yes, so I see on the spiritual aspect relationships and marriages and actual union in itself doesn't require the contract. I don't see it necessarily as contract on that one because contract is more of chains rather than roots, I would say. And yes,
Well,
roots
yes.
can be removed and it does damage you, but you do heal. Contracts are an enslavement of some sort.
Yes, and I think that Yosef, when he was talking about it, was touching just more so on the aspect of like energetically, like you're combining with someone in a very intrinsic manner because it's very intimate, as you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much just like you know, not touching upon the legal necessarily, like in that sort of sense of contract, but just like two souls being bound together in some way, shape, or form, however intensely once again, it ranged from 6 months to 7 years before like that dissipates and all that sort of thing. Based on just like if you go ahead and you do to do,
Oh yeah.
and all that sort of thing. Like, once or, for a small period, what have you. You know what I mean? Um,
Oh yeah,
so
literally
I'm
getting
guessing
somebody
up
out
to,
of your system.
yeah, exactly. You know, um, and hitting such a deep threshold that it takes like that long to go ahead and get them out of your sort of your auric field, your space,
Mm-hmm.
however many layers of your onion, energetically speaking. But aside from the spiritual, the legal, and the sexual, well, granted, I should say sexual from like an energetic standpoint, but for a physical standpoint of the actual biological, the actual, okay, so what is the biological purpose of sex and all of that? Well, physically speaking, there's the sperm, which obviously comes from males. There's the egg, that's for females. And what happens when the man shoots his little swimmers into the female? You get yourself a zygote, you know? And with that, that is the basis for new life. That is the basis for a new being to be grown and developed, nurtured, cared for, and going ahead and being birthed and coming about, right? And throughout this conversation, we're going to be talking about that in different varieties and manners, and touching, of course, more so on the magical, occult, esoteric, spiritual, manners of that, the metaphysical manners of it, right? One thing I do want to go ahead and mention, right, is so of course there's the physical pregnancy, right? But also there is, spiritual babies, which later on in that live stream, which was, tons of the Q and A's, for those who do go ahead and check it out. and all of that sort of thing. When it comes to spirit babies and all that, so you're probably thinking, what the heck? What is that all about and all sort of thing? Well, uh, so for those who are empathic, those who are energetically sensitive, those who are spiritually intuitive, what have you, you may go ahead and become aware of like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm supposed to have a kid, right? And a spirit sticks around. And it's like, hey, look, I'm waiting to be born, or maybe you generate a thought form, or you go ahead and you have some sort of entity, some sort of thing that is uh, due to come about from the union between you and someone else, or you and another entity, or whatever the case may be. But the thing I want to touch on that Brother Yosef went ahead and stated was that abortion is a karmic strike and all of that sort of thing, right? So the getting in the way of that process of birth and all that sort of thing is a karmic strike, and just I figured it was worth mentioning because it was also on the same. Yes, we are back from having technical difficulties, folks, and honestly, it wasn't even like that long of like what was missed. Like it was literally just like a few words, but there was like a little pause there in the flow of conversation. So just had to go ahead, take a moment, and be like, okay, where did we go ahead and we're not able to hear each other. But yes, as it was cutting out, I was pretty much wanting to go ahead and ask you, Debbie, of what your thoughts were on what I just said, and recap since we just went ahead and, listened back to it and figured it out, talking about, the physical aspects of, the physical aspects of the, going ahead and having reproduction, creating a child, abortion potentially being a karmic strike, but just that nature of the union
Mm-hmm.
and the physical manifestation. So, all in all, whatever comes to mind in that
No,
sense.
I do not agree with that statement in any way, shape, or form. I do not believe abortion is any way a karmic strike. Um, Now, I do believe there are certain circumstances where, yes, it could be. If I put it this way, if it is done out of anger, if it is done out of malice, if a child is being brought into the world in a place of love and all of a sudden the woman just wants to just fuck it, I want to hurt somebody, and does it that way, yes, that is going to be a karmic strike. That is going to be something against her, and she's going to have to cleanse herself quite a bit after that. But just like intention is everything with magic, right? Your intention is everything. Your focus is everything. Same thing here. If a woman is not doing it out of malice, but is doing it out of safety for herself, no, I do not see there being karmic strike there. If there is no way that she can do it for either financial reasons or her body just will not, no, there is no karmic strike there. I don't see that at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. If that baby was not planted in her by her choice or by any kind of loving relationship that she is a willing participant of, getting rid of it is a kindness. Think about it this way. The kids that are brought into the world and their parents couldn't, for whatever reasons, abort, right? And their parents hated them the moment that they laid eyes on them. Hated them. mistreated them, or they were treated like a burden, like nothing that they ever did was good enough. What do you think is more of a karmic strike? Recognizing a weakness in yourself and knowing that you could not provide that kind of life for a kid, and that you cannot guarantee that it is going to be adopted out to a loving family. You cannot guarantee that it's going to be in a good foster situation. Hell, if you've got some genetic things that are going on that is potentially or absolutely going to be passed down, be it disease or defect, what do you think is a more kind? Preventing pain and suffering, or causing it?
Well, for me, I will just generally speak, and to keep it brief on the topic, what have you, so we can go on and move on to other parts. That, truth be told, my perspective is the experience of life in of itself is that, which you could say is like, however improbable, right, amongst all the other sorts of manners of life and existence and consciousness that is out. So, me, I'm more so of the frame of mind of, giving an individual a chance at life, however positive or however negative their experience may be. And, for that sort of thing, if they're meant to come out into the world and all of that, so be it, for better or for worse, and all of that. At least allow for the opportunity, because nothing's truly set in stone. You never know how someone's experience is going to be, and all of that. It is, of course, there's probabilities. There's the idea that, oh, you come into this life and you have karma, or you have a particular contract, or something like that, right? From the whole spiritual mumbo jumbo, like, concept of things, right? But nothing's completely 100% set in stone. There's always possibility. There's always, you could say branching timelines, all of that. So I'm like, all right, you go ahead and give someone the opportunity. You never know what the case may be. You never know what they're meant for or meant to be here to do or to experience. But in that sort of sense, like, so going ahead and progressing a little bit more so, going a little bit further along, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have, so physical reproduction, as we just went and covered, and the whole concept of like spirit babies and all that sort of thing of like thought forms, or like, two people going ahead and having intercourse, whether you want to say they're having astral sex, or, just the energetic and spiritual byproduct of the physical action, or what have you, right? And all of that sort of thing. Well, now it goes ahead, and it's worth mentioning the act of Tantra. That is, and you could definitely say in the U.S. and in the Western world, has become very much synonymous and parallel with, oh, yes, we're going to go ahead and have sex, and it's going to have some sort of spiritual aesthetic to it. Or at least that's how people usually go ahead and use it. And you know
Unfortunately,
exactly what I mean.
yes.
Please go ahead and speak on it, please.
So that part, it sucks. And this is where I kind of hate Western thought, because it just bastardizes everything. Oh my God. But no, Tantra is about energy. It is about, how things flow. It doesn't even have to be sexual. Sexual can be an aspect and you can use it to enhance, but it is not innately just like it is about putting your dick into her vagina. Like, it has nothing to do with that. It is all energetic exchange and breathing and getting into a flow state and being able to be present in that. But it is a way of meditation. It is a way of experiencing your spirituality. It has nothing wholly to do with fucking. So I get so irritated with that one.
And then, of course, let's not forget about all different sort of Kama Sutra positions that go along with sexual exploration of oh yes, let's go ahead and do these sexual things, and there being some sort of spiritual effect. It's kind of like just
It's body
that's one of
mudras.
those
That's what it
cases
is.
of oh yes, and like if you want to say intentionally, that's one of the cases where sex precedes the spirituality as opposed to spirituality preceding the sex. You know what I mean? In terms of people's intentions and all of that sort of thing in a lot of cases. But Tantra, right? So Tantra, for those who are unaware, and on the YouTube channel Foolish Fish, happens to go ahead and talk about it quite a bit and showcase some books that speak about Tantra, including Tantra Illuminated. I forget the name of the author, but pretty much in short, in summary, the actual field of Tantra, the actual sort of like magical practices, a lot of times it's associated with left hand path and all that sort of thing. But actually, you can make parallels that aside from just the whole sexual connotation aspect, that a lot of the just standard practices that are done within the Western magical school of thought and all of that are actually preceded by Tantra in the Eastern sense. And then, was brought over. And of course, like we know, modern occultism, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and Theosophy, the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky, and the rest of that, lineage of folks going ahead and having quite a bit of Eastern influence themselves and adapting it into the New Age sort of manner of things. But, yes, so a lot of the actual ritualistic aspects of things, just all that that a lot of people do nowadays and that they had picked up comes from Tantra itself over in the East within Hinduism and Buddhism and these different sorts of Oriental religions and philosophies and belief systems and all of that, right? But of course, talking about the Eastern, the Eastern realm of things, and that as you use that term bastardized quite a bit by the West, right?
Yes.
We have ourselves the chakras, right, and all of that, and don't need to get too much into those particularly right now, right? But in association with Eastern interpretations of energy systems, the Kundalini in relation to the whole mystical union, right?
Hmm.
And just in short, a nice sweet summary, at least on my part, and then of course I'll have Debbie share her thoughts on it, right? So when it comes to the Kundalini, right? That's you think of the imagery or you think of what's spoken about, right? That's like the idea of energy visualized by twin snakes, going ahead and going up your spine and going ahead and interweaving and interchanging and flowing upward your spine and all of that. Another sort of visual imagery is the symbol of the caduceus, the staff of Hermes, used by medical doctors for healing and all that sort of thing. And also physically represented by DNA. Going ahead and once again, the masculine and feminine energies intertwining and interweaving up your spine to go ahead and elicit a Kundalini awakening within the mind and all of that sort of thing. So, your thoughts on all of that, Debbie?
Well, I haven't actually seen the twin snake for Kundalini Awakening. I've seen a singular snake for that one. So it is less two for that one, just the one, but it is twisting up the spine to bring it through your energy points. Um, but I mean, the snake is both a feminine symbol and a masculine symbol, dependent on the culture, honestly. Um, so with that, yes, DNA, the caduceus, got you. That one being two pairs intertwining to create something new. And the caduceus is always all about healing. So it is repairing, it is mending. Um, that's one of the reasons why it is taken as the symbol for like hospitals.
Oh yes, yes, and all that sort of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, with that, right? Like, so eliciting the Kundalini awakening, right? And doing that, you're supposed to go ahead and then generate, the chrism, right? Generate the chrism. And, a lot of this, when it comes to a more so spiritual, metaphysical, new agey sort of like interpretation of old, like, Western religion, so on and so forth, right? Or even Eastern figures going ahead and talking about this, right? This is where, people speak on, Jesus Christ, right? Chrism, Christ, going ahead and talking about, like, being anointed, right? And the oil of that not being actual oil, but, the, the actual, like, fluid from the process of Kundalini awakening and the physical byproduct of that. And also to extents of, Buddha or Krishna talking about these sorts of things as well. When you think of savior figures or when you think of, uh, great teachers, so on and so forth, you usually think of those three: Christ, Buddha, and Krishna, as an avatar of Vishnu, right? Um, and there's one individual that's both you and I have been listening to a little bit more so recently, and that being Bill Donahue, who goes and takes on like breaking down aspects of the Bible and when it comes to what Jesus Christ had stated in the New Testament, and just more so like symbolic breakdown of
Mm-hmm.
things within that text, and talking about, like, oh yes, when you go into meditation and you're doing these sorts of things, the Kundalini awakening, this occurs, and he's not the only one who does it, but at least for our own frame of reference, recently we've been going ahead and listening to him speak on that quite a bit.
Yes.
Anything that comes to mind from having heard Bill Donahue speak on the nature of Kundalini awakening, or just Kundalini awakenings in general,
Well,
once again,
Kundalini
or
awakenings,
Prism?
but it's just the union between masculine and feminine. There is something that just came to mind that I do want to bring up, and it's something
Yes.
that so I look into like translations because I do believe there is a lot lost in translation in terms of how things are presented now. Um, and there is something in the King James Bible that it's always bothered me how Eve was created from the rib of Adam, right? I'm sure you've heard that, right?
Yes.
The actual translation is the side. The side. And if you think about it, really think about it. Adam, the original one, was both masculine and feminine. It was both. That was the perfect union. And it was split into two. Half was taken to create Eve. So,
Yes. So you're saying the original Adam was more so of a hermaphroditic figure.
yes, I am. And I know that's sacrilegious fuck. But at the same time, that makes a whole hell of a lot more sense than this entire woman, this entire being, which is responsible for the procreation of an entire species, was just created from a tiny piece of the man. Because men and women, we are equal. Because we each have our role to play. And one needs the other. As much as it sucks, one will always need the other. Because of how that energy interchanges and how whenever we actually have that union that is good, good things can actually flow versus being stopped up and stagnant and stuck. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. And, I'm going to be a bit a shithead for this moment,
Be a
as
shithead.
I'm sure you're well accustomed to. And, honestly, Eve, being the rib that was taken out of Adam and all sort of thing, whether just a dude or whether a hermaphrodite or what have you, maybe there were just some aliens, going ahead and doing some cloning or, going ahead and generating from stem cells or something like that to go ahead and bring about Eve as another being, genetic engineering and all that, the
I
whole
mean, we can
idea
go
of the
back to
Anunnaki and shit.
Mesopotamian. Yeah, I was about to say we can go back to Mesopotamian lore for that one. Because we're all test tube babies, don't you know? So,
Well, yes. Folks out there, go read some Zechariah Sitchin or something, or go watch Ancient Aliens on History Channel.
lots of
They
that,
definitely
yes.
love talking about that sort of thing, but
100%.
yeah, to kind of get a little bit more so on track and all that with the whole mystical union. And having mentioned the figure of the hermaphrodite, I do want to talk about that a bit later on after we go ahead and cover a couple more aspects of different things. But yes, so when we're talking about the mystical union and the coming together of the masculine and the feminine, right? This is definitely more so your wheelhouse than mine. But when it comes to astrology, right? you know, astrology and all that sort of thing. What would you go ahead and denote when it comes to, say, the aspects of cardinal signs and fixed signs and mutable? What would you say are, the masculine, like, I'm trying to think, the masculine dynamic, the female dynamic, or the interchangeable dynamic when it comes to those, aspects of the signs?
It's hard to point down because technically each of the signs themselves has the masculine and feminine denotation, right? Um, but in terms of cardinal, I would say that is more male. Um, Initially, I had said that mutable could be more feminine, but now that I'm thinking about it, because mutable changes between that cardinal and that fixed, I think fixed is more of that feminine because it's going to keep things going. Fixed is the season where things don't really change, it remains the way that it's supposed to. Whereas mutable, I believe, would be that in between, um, where you've got seasons changing from one to the next. And yeah, it can be very chaotic. Like, I know in my area, that is tornado season, right?
Yes.
So initially, you had asked me, I still remain pretty firm on cardinal being masculine, but I do believe fixed would be more feminine, and then mutable would be the one between.
Oh, yes. Yes. And there's ideas of like which signs are like masculine and feminine and all that sort of thing, but don't need necessarily get into that. We might get into it if we talk about astrology as a singular subject and all that. But since we're talking about you know I guess astrological or astronomical sort of things, or planetary sort of things, also what comes to mind for me is that since we were speaking on the spine, you're speaking on Kundalini awakening, and all of that sort of thing, right? In relation to a mystical union within ourselves, right? Because I didn't say that before, but that's essentially what the Kundalini awakening is, and what the that sort of thing is like. So aside from trying to go ahead and have sex with a partner or fucking or having the masculine and feminine come together in that aspect, right? Like having that occur for oneself, right? through meditation or whatever other means, that in of itself is the mystical union within oneself, energetically speaking. You know what I mean? So from a planetary standpoint, right? Even the planet has a damn spine. You know what I mean? That being, or an energetic spine, that being the South Pole and the North Pole. That polar axis right there, and all of that sort of thing. So figured might as well macrocosmically, mention that as well. And another thing to go ahead and to mention is, I should have mentioned it earlier, but as is usual, a lot of times going ahead and name dropping the book, Language of Creation by Matthew Peugeot, brother of Jonathan Peugeot, and talking about the orderly aspect of things and the feminine aspect of things. Since we mentioned Bill Donahue talking about symbolism within the Bible and all of that, that book is particularly about doing so within the Old Testament and in Genesis in particular. Um, but yes, figured might as well shout it out, due to the subject matter. And
And
while
because it's
we
one
were
of your
talking about,
favorites, let's be realistic.
well, yeah, and that one honestly just drummed up a lot of interesting discussion between you, I, Lono, other people that we know, and yes, due to my insistence of wanting to read it for what have you, whatever purposes, and what we got out of it. But like I said, it generated quite a bit of good conversation. Whether I was more so enthusiastic on it, or you were like, okay, this is hella freaking repetitive, or what have you, you know.
Because it fucking was. It's good.
Oh yes.
It's good. But fuck those illustrations. Oh my god.
Oh yes, yes. The illustrations were very rudimentary, but for me, I am cool with the redundancy personally, but not everybody necessarily wants to see the same sort of image over and over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, since we went ahead and we're touching upon, like, the Kundalini and the spine and that sort of process, having the twin snakes go ahead and come up and all that sort of thing, right? Honestly, this is pretty good timing because very, very recently, our friends that we went ahead and had a conversation with over at Psychosmos changed their logo to something more so akin to the Caduceus or based on that. And it's definitely, good for us to go ahead and mention the process of the sacred secretion, right? And truth be told, like, I would say I am by no means expert on that, and I'm kind of just like delving into it, of the sacred secretion process in of itself, which isn't exactly Kundalini awakening. It's a little more specified sort of method of energy and what have you is based on a particular cycle within the body, and I'm pretty much going to go ahead and say, whether it's our boys over at Psychosmos or, Santos Bonacci or Kelly Marie Kerr, who went ahead and actually wrote the foreword for the Psychosmos book, that we point you their way where they can go ahead and speak on it a bit more so for the sacred secretion process. And the links for their channels will be in the description and all that. And of course, obviously, aside from clicking on links, what have you, you can search, Google, DuckDuckGo, Bing, YouTube, all that sort of stuff for that topic and moving on further. But I figured it was worth going ahead and giving, the subject and them a shout out, a mention, and all of that.
Absolutely.
Oh yes. So moving a bit further, in all of that, all right. Let's go ahead and talk about hermaphrodites. Since you
Sounds
mentioned
good.
it before.
I just jumped the gun with everything. I'm great that way. It's fantastic.
No, no, no. It's completely fine that you went ahead and mentioned it. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about hermaphrodites. And all that, so generally, what the heck is a hermaphrodite? That's, someone who is considered intersex when they're born, having both parts whether they are both working or thought of one working, another one not working, or neither working, and all that sort of thing. And when it comes to the chromosomal level, I believe that I'm having an extra chromosome, and honestly, I will go ahead and pitch it over to you for the specifics of that, Debbie, because I know we've had conversations about this before, and at present, I can't remember
I don't think
that
it's the
sort of aspect of it. But
chromosomes. Um, no, so it's technically by medical terminology in the modern way, it would be seen as a birth defect, right? And a lot of people, they will have like they will choose the sex of their child at birth if this happens, which is a little fucked up in my opinion. But yes, they are. It is during the process in which a fetus is choosing gender in the womb, there are hormones released, and during this process, either the hormones are not released or they have, whatever kind of, genetic differences or whatnot going on that they are just both. They may have both ovaries and testes. They may have a womb and a penis. They may have, you know, anything in between. Um, and it's interesting. So for myself, one of the things whenever you were like, "Hey, we're gonna do this tonight. We're gonna talk about this," um, one thing that came up for me, and I had kind of been holding in the back of my head, is the idea of the two spirit people of our indigenous North American folks. So these are people that either they are born intersex, where they are just both, right? Or they are, a male, but they are feminine, or they are a female, but they are masculine. And they are seen and held in very high respect in these cultures because they are seen as a more advanced or spiritual people. They have two spirits versus just one. They're an upgrade in a sense. And so whenever you had said that we're gonna do this tonight, I was just like, okay, this is the one I'm gonna bring up. But whenever North America was colonized, the French actually had a word for them. I believe it's bardachi or something of that nature, or bardachi or bardage, something very, very close to that. Um, and yes, there may have been more homosexual connotations with them, but it was more of it didn't matter because they were completely accepted and elevated with who they were. Now, I have seen, unfortunately, that this concept has been brought forward in a negative way, where instead of allowing that honor, people are trying to claim that honor, which is that's not how that works. But I thought this was a really interesting one because they take it as because these people have two spirits, they are able to do both the masculine and the feminine things. They don't have boundaries like that. Like only women can do this or only men can do that. They can do both. Who
oh
cares?
yes,
Who
yes,
cares what's in your pants?
oh yes. And also, just for the sake of mentioning, having two individuals within the same person, while it's not expressly the case of hermaphrodites, twins, potentially having, one child be born whether it's like, another child physically dies in the, like, at birth and having two spirits associated, and all of that, or going ahead and like through the actual process of like, being formulated in the womb, that one is absorbed by the other, you could say, and that phenomenon occurring a bit. Not to harp too much on that, unless you have any sort of thoughts on that sort of phenomenon.
No, and I think this actually feeds back into what we were talking about earlier. Now, in the way that I interpret the world and the way that I have seen it, spirits don't really enter until that last trimester. That's that's the time when, mom gets real tired, right? Um, but before that, no, I don't see it as, you know, you absorbed your twin at like 6 weeks. Like, sure, cool, awesome. Maybe you get a tetratoma from it. Maybe it'll grow teeth. Maybe you'll be a chimera because you'll have two genetic signatures. But I don't see it as having two spirits from that. Um, at least in my interpretation of it.
Yes, yes. Um, or there's like when it comes to actual twins, like the idea that like there's one spirit, or
Mm-hmm.
shared by two bodies, in some cases,
I've
because
seen
of
that,
how
yeah.
intertwined, like two, like like a shared soul, because of how intertwined or psychically, or energetically, empathically connected that both individuals happen to be. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, so on to actual hermaphrodites themselves, right? So you can be born with a dick, you can be born with a pussy. Sometimes you get born with a dick and pussy, right? And people existing like that, I've happened to come across a couple people who were born and all that sort of thing, with both parts. And, apparently only one part working, at least in the individuals that I've come across, with that sort of phenomena, right? But aside from actual physical people who are hermaphrodites, right? Where does that terminology come from? What is it based on? Where do we get the term hermaphrodite? Well, it comes from the Greco Roman figure, Hermaphroditus, or Hermaphroditos. And, just a short little blurb. And, for further information, you can go ahead and go to the site that I'm going to link. That, if you've heard other recordings and talks that I've referenced at various occasions, the site Theoi, and going ahead and talking about different Greco-Roman entities and beings, gods, titans, what have you. But in any case, right? So Hermaphroditus, was the god of hermaphrodites and of effeminates. He was numbered amongst the winged love gods known as Eros. And Hermaphroditus was a son of Hermes and Aphrodite, the gods of male and female sexuality, right? So when it comes to using the Kabbalistic tree of life and those sort of associations, and that as a model for comprehension within the Western magical school of thought, right? And the different spears on the tree of life, right? So starting with Venus, actually, we'll start with Hod, in terms of the progression, ascending wise. So we have Mercury, Hod, that's Hermes, right? Which happens to actually be on the female side, as opposed to the masculine side. Interestingly enough, that is the pillar of severity, Boaz, right? The spear of Mercury, Hod. That right there is on the feminine side, and then you move over to the spear of Netzach, which is in of itself the Venus that is Venusian, so more so masculine on the masculine side of things, on the pillar of mercy, Jachin, right? And that being the first set of gender gender polarized spheres on that tree of life. And, um, also another dynamic I want to mention is that from Venus to Mars, right? So when you go up the tree of life, right? You start at, from starting from Venus, right? You go through the middle pillar, right? And there, that's Tifereth, that's the sun, that's a solar sort of like, sphere for beauty, what have you. That's in between because on the middle pillar, right? And then past that, the next polarized opposite of the Venusian sphere is going to be Gebura, which is the Martian sphere, and that once again being feminine as opposed to what usually is thought of as masculine and all of that sort of thing. Um, and pretty much just like thinking about how it's kind of like reversed and interchanged on the Kabbalistic tree of life. Um, so, how about your thoughts on that, Devi? On the origin of hermaphrodite in that figure. If you've heard anything
Oh,
or
yeah.
know of the mythos.
I
Oh,
know of
go
some
ahead.
mythos about Hermaphroditus. So I believe there was a story where he was such a pretty boy because he came out a boy initially and drew such attention from this one particular female that she literally would not let go of him and merged with him to his horror. And that's how he became Hermaphroditus. Um, Instead of it being Hermaphroditus just being born in between, um, which obsessive love, never a good thing. Never a good thing. In terms of the pillars being quite opposite, I find this funny. And you had mentioned the polarities in terms of like the earth and everything. And I'm sure you've heard that the polarities are changing. And this happens all over the place where positive becomes negative or they move, right? Feminine becomes
Or
masculine and
yes,
masculine becomes feminine because chaos and order have to interchange. One cannot just remain stagnant like they can't. So you touched on it and I wanted to kind of like be like, yes, you got it, because like my intuition's going like off like freaking haywire over here.
oh
But
yes,
it is these aspects, they have changed and they do change and they will continue to change. Um because that's just the part of the cycles of this existence. This is our Ouroboros. It must go in its cycles and circles and circumambulation and all that shit.
yes.
Um, so finding that center ground so that you're not swinging violently like a pendulum, um, because let's think of it this way. If we're thinking of a full feminine society, masculine would seem chaotic, right? Because they would have their own structure. If you're looking at a full masculine society, the feminine seems chaotic. So one is always going to seem at the other extreme. So it doesn't matter necessarily if one is order or chaos. They are both. It just matters where you stand. So if you're standing in the middle, then honestly, you are on one of the calmest grounds that you can be because you're accepting both sides, that both sides can be both structured and chaotic. They are just different in structure and chaos.
Oh yes, yes. Once again, the middle pillar on the Kabbalistic tree of life, and a lot of people, are aware of the left-hand path, right-hand path. By my own sort of like, denoting of my own self spiritually, and of course, you stated to me before, but you can speak for yourself, obviously. That I would say I'm more so middle path, in terms of my demeanor and approach towards things. For you, you would say that you are middle path, correct?
Yes.
Yes, not necessarily leaning one way or the other too much, what have you. But when it comes to the actual middle pillar itself, right? As I stated, the quickest, there's the lightning bolt pattern, right? Whether it's the ascension or the descension, for whatever purpose or aims, whether you're trying to become more so higher up or be a higher vibe, man, with new age terminology, or go ahead and try to manifest or do sorcery, or bring things down to an earthly level to Malkuth, the kingdom, Earth itself. Uh, the Thunderbolt pattern, as it's called, right? Well, there is that, but honestly, what's the quickest way from A to B? In a straight fucking line. So going from Keter down to Malkuth, and the spears, and also the hidden spear, the Ot, um, going through that, and saying like the other spears, like they're helpful, they have their purpose, they have their function, but you don't necessarily need them all the time, and all that sort of thing. You don't necessarily need it to go ahead and do something quick, to go ahead and go up or go down. You know what I mean? And that's something that you learn as time goes on. But once again, a lot of people are fixated on left hand path or right hand path and all that sort of shit. Thoughts on what was just stated?
Thoughts on. I thought I already shared my damn thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like on like the middle pillar, and
Well,
like
yes, the way that you are describing the middle pillar is exactly what I had said previously. Just standing in the middle.
oh yes,
There's
oh
there
yes.
really is nothing more to share about it, if we're being honest. It is
Okay,
having that
okay.
perspective from the center.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead and reframe it. So I guess in particular, what I'm asking, like, the nature of like, people being fixated with left hand path or right hand path,
Eh.
and if they're trying to like either get higher up or go ahead and like ascend up the spears or come down, right, and manifest stuff or do sorcery or whatever the heck, that instead of just doing the thunderbolt pattern, you just go straight up the middle pillar or go
Mm-hmm.
down the middle pillar, and kind of like just quickest way is from A to B. You
Yes.
know what I'm saying? Yeah. So more so your thoughts in that particular aspect of it. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. So, in terms of that, depends on the kind of person you are. Because some people need to learn the lessons from both sides. Um, if you can just, zoom through it and you understand it, you comprehend it, and you can do that, sure, cool. Some people need the longer process. So even though you hear left hand path and it's like, oh, that's, pretty much idolatry of the self, and, why be a servant in heaven when you can be a king in hell, right? Um, and then other side, so literally being the servant in heaven, or living for others and living for the service of others, which is not a bad thing, just everything in moderation. Middle path is definitely, for my thought process, it assists in one, your own growth, because there are some things that, yeah, you're going to do for other people, but you're also going to make sure that you're taken care of at the same time, versus just being a complete detriment to yourself.
Oh yes. And well said. And I think also we can go ahead and move a little bit more so onward to the figure of the Baphomet, popularized by Eliphas Levi. And obviously, this being a very popular sort of symbol of being like hermaphroditic and embodying both masculine and feminine. A lot of times, usually associated with the left hand path. Quite a few people use it in that sort of manner, especially the Satanic Temple and all the uproar and all the the fucking pomp and circumstance and all that they've gotten from the media and all that sort of shit. But the figure of the Baphomet, the symbol of it in of itself being hermaphroditic. What are your thoughts of it?
Honestly, I see it as encompassing more of the wild nature of people rather than the civilized mask that we wear. It is acceptance versus judgment, if that makes sense. I see it as the devil card. So y'all know I work tarot, and we'll cover tarot more in depth eventually. But in terms of that, the Baphomet is on the devil card. And it is seen as, oh, that's negative, that's addictions, that's pleasures, that's this, that, and the other. But if you really look at it, it's a balance. It is man and beast, so human and beast, but it is also man and woman. It is finding that middle ground not only between the masculine and the feminine, but also the wilds and civilization. So it's in perfect harmony wherever it goes. And because of that, that thing is a heck of a lot more divine than most people, than honestly most symbologies used for deities. Because anywhere that it goes, it is home, it is comfortable.
Yes, and with the Baphomet, so once again, I mentioned the sword mujer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Earlier on, we're talking about the masculine and nature of the sword, and when you look at the Baphomet, right, as with the sword mujer with the right hand, and that being more so of the masculine, like polarity in the pointing of it upward, usually towards a sun. And then also we have the left hand pointing downward and going ahead and looking to point at the moon, what have you. Um, and of course, obviously with the aspects of like from the sexual nature of it, right? You got a rack, you got some titties on the Baphomet, and a lot of times you got a wiener going ahead and being shown in the symbol. For those who have not seen it or are wanting a visual reminder, I guess, go ahead and think about titties and wieners. Why not?
Oh, 100%. There's also a couple of things that I'd like to say else about the Baphomet. Because
Yes,
it was very popular in terms of like the Knights Templar, right?
yes,
After they came back from the Crusades and the Holy Land and whatnot. The name Baphomet, if you think about it, when they're trying to say an Arabic name in French and they're not understanding it, it's Muhammad. That's exactly what it is.
yes,
In addition, the iconography of like the goat man, we see that in Hellenistic with Pan, right?
yes.
We see that in Nordic Celtic with Cernunnos. We see that marriage of man and wild in many other cultures, and it's only demonized, honestly, through the Christian lens.
Oh, yes, yes. Now, once again, having mentioned the Satanic Temple, and while that being, at least them presenting it as secular and supposedly Anton LaVey, the intentions of it being secular iconography for a secular, carnalistic, atheistic sort of perspective and all that, being seen as antagonistic towards, Christian church of different varieties and dominations, Catholic Church, and all that sort of thing, and being in opposition and co opted in that sort of sense, where originally you could say, yeah, maybe that wasn't the original meaning and or purpose, but in its modern usage and how people think about it, it's usually more so thought of as like, antagonistic or left hand path or satanic or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's more of knowing where it comes from versus just accepting it as it is, because if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. If we don't understand the symbology in front of us, then we understand nothing.
Oh yes, yes. So going ahead and continuing onward, um, since we talked about the Baphomet and that having, its satanic connotations and all that sort of crap, we might as well go ahead and talk about our good old angelic buddies and how they relate to the subject, right? So when it comes to angels, archangels, different varieties and means and manners and all that sort of thing, both the heavenly, both the fallen, both the Enochian, all the different sorts of connotations and all that, and honestly, just any sort of entity or deity or spirit in general. Like sure, some may be masculine in how they present themselves, or some may be feminine in how they present themselves. But truth be told, everything's got a little bit of everything. Like you got both inside of it in some way, shape, or form, right? So they're pretty much androgynous. You know what I
Oh, they're
mean? They
completely
aren't
androgynous.
necessarily.
They're a fucking Ken doll.
Yes.
Who cares? If it's a Ken doll with titties or if it's a Ken doll just straight pectorals, it's a Ken doll. It's got nothing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, for those who have played with those toys back in the day. But yes, angels, when you look at the Renaissance sort of like imagery of angels, right? They're depicted as androgynous. They're depicted as like, having an effeminate like, face, but they're like, and having long hair a lot of times and all sort of thing, but they're more so their build is masculine, you know what I mean? In some cases, right? Or pretty much just like to the point where it's not too defined or what have you. And once again, like instead of having a wiener or a vagina or any sort of like particular parts on there, just go ahead and it's a blank space. It's a free space. Go grab a marker. Draw some doodles on it or something. That's
Put a
pretty much what
smiley
it's good
face there.
for. Yeah, exactly. But yes, so angels go ahead and be androgynous. And for those who pray to angels or they invoke them or what have you, you go ahead and interact with them. Like you may have some that are more so presenting themselves as feminine or masculine to you, or on average or what have you. But to some extent, I think that's humans' influence over time on them and kind of like the symbiotic relationship that the human race and the larger consciousness has with these entities and thought forms and so on and so forth. And just once again, on average, how they will present themselves. Not in every circumstance, but on average. And your thoughts, Debbie?
I mean, with angels, I've seen them presented as both, but honestly, they're what did you say before? Non-Euclidean beings. They pick a
Oh,
form
yes,
that you
yes. In terms
understand.
of actual, yeah.
They pick a form that you understand, honestly. But otherwise, just expect them to be like a just a mass, not something that you could really comprehend. It is not until they take that form so that you can see them, comprehend them, take them in a sense that that even becomes part of the discussion.
Oh, yes. Just being more so abstract, you know.
Extremely.
Yes,
I love being
abstract.
trapped in
As
like the tall tower, the tall hollow tower with eyeballs just looking at me. It was so much fun. It was great.
yes, and one of my favorite anime being Fullmetal Alchemist and the imagery of the eyes. and all that sort of thing, and various sorts of things within darkness. Whether it's the gate of truth, or it's going ahead and the homunculus and all that sort of stuff. But yes, all the eyes and all that sort of thing, or the teeth, and just pretty much that sort of just raw, like, looking at you. We're staring, motherfucker. We're staring. And of course, when you think of the, like, what is considered a quote unquote biblically accurate angel, just being eyes and, wheels and all that sort of thing. So abstract, non-Euclidean. But yes, in terms of how they're depicted from Renaissance iconography and imagery, being, androgynous, hermaphroditic, not necessarily going ahead and being, they're intersex, not being one or the other. They can present themselves as such, but in their true actual essence and nature of being, then they aren't. And of course, this extends to other entities, spirits, deities, gods, goddesses, primordial things, whatever the fuck. And of course, for our own spirits and souls within ourselves, us human beings, this also applies in nature that, sure, I, as Twisted, am a dude in this life. Devi is a woman. But in terms of our souls and spirits, right? Like, sure, we may go ahead and play our roles in this conscious existence, and maybe even energetically go ahead and have a little bit more tilted towards one way or the other, but we also have the same components within us. The whole universe is inside of us, the whole notion as above, so below, all different cliches and phrases that we usually use to get these concepts and ideas across.
Yes. As within, so
Yes.
without.
Yes.
It's just one large pattern within a pattern.
Oh, yes. Yes. The whole fractal nature. And yes, you've heard us speak about it in different instances, different aspects, and we'll continue to go ahead and speak about it. But, honestly, I want to go ahead and move on to just one more set of symbolism and iconography that gets this point across. And I think it's honestly the best way to wrap up this subject for the time being. And that is that of within, since I mentioned Fullmetal Alchemist, good transition, good segue, talking about alchemy in of itself, right?
Good job.
So we can use, yes, and we can go ahead and use it as a conclusion, as a recap and a summarizing of what we discussed thus far. So the Red King and the White Queen in alchemy. So where, if you've ever seen this sort of iconography, right? Where did it come from? It is believed to have come from the Rosarium Philosophorum, or the Rosary of the Philosophers, which was published in 1550 and includes 20 illustrations. And what is the Red King and the White Queen all about? The union of Red King and White Queen is often called the chemical marriage. In illustrations, it is depicted as courtship and sex. Sometimes they are garbled as if they have just been brought together, offering each other flowers. Sometimes they are naked, preparing to consummate their marriage that will eventually lead to the allegorical offspring, the Rebis. And for the Rebis, in terms of that sort of iconography and imagery, usually it's seen as a two-headed being with more so a masculine head and a feminine head and all that sort of thing. A lot of times depicted, with an egg and all of that. Let me actually go ahead and pull up the imagery right now. For the moment, just go ahead and kind of describe it a little more so. Yes, so going ahead and sitting atop a spear with wings with a dragon behind it, and once again the Rebis, and that going ahead and having solar iconography and moon iconography one side and then on the other, and all of that, and that being a pictorial sort of representation of when you do the great work in magic or alchemy or mysticism or what have you. You have the Red King and the White Queen that you're going ahead and working within yourself, right? These two, the masculine and feminine, these two different aspects. And then you find the middle ground. You find where they mesh together, and they come together to make the Rebis. And that's the thing, right? Like the mystical union. Sure, we were talking about hermaphrodites. We are talking about people can be born as them. But, the point of the spiritual path, the spiritual pursuit is to gain perspective, knowledge, wisdom, experience in different sorts of means and manners on your journey, however many lifetimes it takes, however many times it takes for you to quote unquote go through the reincarnation cycle, to beat your karma, to go ahead and do this, that, and the third. The point is to go ahead and transcend that, to be like, you know what, I am not male, I am not female singularly. I am both. I am everything and nothing all at the same time. As above, so below. All the other freaking cliches that we can go ahead and use phrase wise. But from an alchemical symbolic standpoint, it's to become the Rebis, become a hermaphrodite, and all that sort of thing. So yes. The mystical union. Do you have any particular thoughts after that, Debbie?
So with that, I mean, Red King and White Queen, that's also the what it is sulfur and mercury, right?
Yes.
So they are actual chemical components. And so the sulfur, active, volatile, makes things happen, right? Mercury, it has the ability to react, but only with certain things. So it's fixed. It's not going to move until it is given something else to move. Which perfect imagery, honestly, for it. But so this is actually one of the first times that I've seen this. I was just reading up on it. Go figure, right? Learning every day.
Which imagery is it the first time you've
I
actually
have
gone and
never
seen?
seen the Red King and the White Queen before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, go figure. Go figure. But of course, I've done research into alchemy and things like that. It's just I hadn't seen that one. Go figure.
Oh, yes.
But with that, honestly, I'm spent. I'm so spent.
Oh, yes, because of the time of night and such that is, yes.
Yes.
Hence why I figured it'd be a good way to go ahead and wrap it up and close it up, talking about the chemical marriage, and use that as a summary, the iconography of the Red King, White Queen, the Rebis, and all of that. Yes.
I
So,
would hardly
you're
agree.
spent. You're spent. You're tired. I myself still got a bit more energy, but I'm sure I'm going to go ahead and wind down a bit soon. But yes, there we have, folks. The mystical union. Talking about hermaphrodites quite a bit. So think about the wieners and the vajayjays and the titties and all that quite a bit on an individual. Why not? For some people, that's their actual thing. That's their usual kink. That's their actual kink and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so talk. So generally, we also talk about like the Kundalini and going ahead and having that sort of like awakening within oneself and a variety of other shit.
So
But
much
yeah,
shit.
there we go. Yeah, what was that?
So much shit. There's so much shit.
Ah, yes, yes. But yeah, so any final closing thoughts, Debbie?
I'm tired. That's my closing thought. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you.
Yes, there you go. Sleepy Debbie, folks. And yes, I am Twisted. So here we are at the Open Sorcery once again. And stay frosty, nieces. Peace.
Have a great night.